वर्षिणी वासाछत्रधारा गोराचान रत्ना सिंहासने आरती को रे ना ब्रह्मा आदि चामरा दुलाया संजया मुकुंदा बसु गोषादि गाया घंटा भाजे भाजे करताला घंटा भाजे भाजे करताला शिवा शुकनारदा प्रेमे गदा गादा भक्ति विनोदा देखे गौरार संपादा नमो विष्णुपदाय कृष्णपृष्ठाय भूतले श्री देवे गौरवाणी प्रचारिणे निर्विशेषा शून्यवादी पाश्चात्यादि सतारिणे Govinda.
Srila Prabhupada ki Nityalila Pradishtavam Paramahamsa Paribrajagacharya Ashtottara Sadashri Shri Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur Srila Prabhupada ki Shri Shri Radha Shyama Sundar ki Shri Radha Madhav ki Shri Radha Vrindavan Chandra ki ISKCON Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shri Vasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrindaki Nanda Kodi Vaishnava Vrindaki Namacharya Srila Haridas Thakur ki all glories to the assembled devotees, all glories to the assembled devotees, all glories to the assembled devotees, all glories, all glories, all glories, all glories to Shri Guru and Gauranga.
dadaine Hiranyakashipu vakshaha Shilatantang akalaye Ito nga simha pagato nga simha Yato yato yamikato nga simha Bahir nga simha gagaye nga simha Narasimgama vinsharangam prapade Avakara kamalavare nakam Adbhuta shringam Dalita hiranyakashipu Tangobengam Keshavadetang Agahari Rupa Jaya Jagadisha Hare Jaya Jagadisha Hare Jaya Jagadisha Hare Avakara Kamala Vare Adbhuta shringam Dalita hiranyakashipu Tangobengam Keshavadretang Agahari Rupa Jaya Jagadisha Hare Jaya Jagadisha Hare Shinde Bhagavan ki, Bala Maharaj ki, Jai Gopalananda.
Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivaradari. Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivaradari. Yasodanandana Vraja Jana Ranjana. Yasodanandana Vraja Jana Ranjana. Yamuna Tira Vanachari. Yamuna Tira Vanachari. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Hare Krishna. Oh, goodness. Om Ganatamarandasya Gananjana Salakaya Chaksturunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Vanchakalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhya Cha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Well, thank you very much for coming. I know it's very hard on a weekday after working and children going to school and everything to free yourselves. I appreciate everyone coming. So I could just, speak, or we could have a discussion, or we could have questions and answers. What would be your preference? If you have questions, we could start with that about Srila Prabhupada or whatever, or I can just speak something. You tell me what you would like. Okay, we can start with that. And then if there's anything that comes up, please bring it up. Don't be shy. So, as I mentioned on Sunday, I was searching without realizing I was searching, and I got an invitation to go to India from a friend in college, a college friend. He was actually doing his master's thesis on the Hare Krishna people. Originally he thought to do his master's thesis on Zen Buddhism and the Hare Krishna people, and he went to the Zen Buddhist Center in Buffalo, New York, which was not far from our college, in Rochester, New York. And at that time, all the Zen Buddhist students were facing the wall, meditating on the sound of one hand clapping. And so there wasn't much opportunity for photographs. But he went to the center in Brooklyn, New York, and the devotees were out on Harinam. It was very colorful, and they were having festivals. And when they saw his photographs, they were all very excited and encouraging. So he dropped the idea of Zen Buddhism as part of his master's thesis and focused entirely on Hare Krishna. And so when the first group of devotees, about 30 devotees, went to India with Srila Prabhupada, that was in 1970, he joined them there. He went in December. They went in October. So a few months later, he joined them in India. So I was getting letters from him, and as fate would have it, that was the time that Srila Prabhupada took the devotees to Surat. And of all the places the devotees went, Surat was unique because the people were so receptive. You know, in the West, we'd go in Harinam, and the comments they would get was from the passerbys, "Get a job." Why don't you get a job? But in Surat, the mayor of the city had the schools and the factories closed so that the people could attend Harinam. And every day in the newspaper, the paper would publish the route the Harinam party would go on, and then the people would line the streets along that route. And if it was a hot day, which it usually was, they would cover the road with saris so that the devotees would be shaded from the sun. And as the devotees went by on this planned route, they would have garlands. And they'd get so many garlands that they couldn't see. They had to take them off and give them away. So it was just phenomenal. So I was getting these letters. It was like from another planet of what was going on in Surat. Every day they'd be invited to people's homes for prasadams, and they'd have like 2 or 3 full meals every day, the devotees. And they weren't, used to that. They're young people. They're very enthusiastic about prasadam. And so sometimes they'd become ill. And they stayed at the home of one very wealthy person, and he and his family actually moved out of their home to accommodate the devotees. And they gave the devotees whatever they wanted. It was hospitality that we only imagined. We never ever experienced coming from the West. So it was just a remarkable situation. And the devotees were stunned by how receptive and appreciative the people were. And they were commenting, I wasn't there, I was just reading about it, but they were commenting how much energy Prabhupada had. He would translate early in the morning. He never stopped translating. And then all day long there'd be programs. He would be meeting people or going to people's homes. And then he would also encourage the Harinam party. So it was, just when I read about it, I thought, my goodness, I would like to experience something like this. Just the hospitality and the welcome and the appreciation of Prabhupada and his devotees. But when I came, it was in March, and at that time, the devotees had rented a small, well, not so small, you could say a good-sized apartment in what's called the Akashganga building, which is in downtown Bombay, just overlooking the ocean there. They were on the 7th floor. And they were preparing for this huge Cross Maidan pandal. It was the very first pandal that the devotees had done in India. And this extraordinary person, Shamsundar Prabhu, he recently wrote a book about his experiences. He was there, and he always thinks big. And Prabhupada also thinks big. So we had very big thinkers. So I was wandering around Bombay taking photographs. At that time, I wasn't entirely absorbed in Krishna consciousness. I was very curious about India generally. So I'd be going down a street, and there'd be this billboard with a photograph of Prabhupada, huge, just enormous. Just his face, like 20 times life size. Cross Maidan with the dates, the American and foreign disciples welcome you, please come. Everywhere you went. It'd be on the radio. So when it finally happened, it was just packed. The location could have not have been set better, right in the heart of Bombay, there's a big empty field. So people leaving work would come and sit and just be awestruck by Westerners, white-skinned people who were not only appreciating their culture, but actually living their culture. And these people in Bombay, they were looking to the West, thinking this is modern, after 200 years of British rule and the British trying to indoctrinate the Indian people that your culture is inferior to our culture. Your culture is not as civilized as our culture. So there was this huge push in India to look to the West, modernization. And people were consciously or unconsciously turning away from their own culture. So then here you have these Westerners coming who are absorbed in chanting God's names that were familiar in India, Krishna's names, Rama's names. And so the Indian people were just stunned by this, just absolutely stunned. And wearing the dhoti and the sari, most of the audience, they were in pants. But on the stage, they were wearing dhotis. You know, maybe in the audience their fathers would wear dhotis or their grandfathers, but not them. They were in the suit and tie mode. And so they were just riveted by this. And it wasn't a large group, it was perhaps 30 of us, devotees, but very enthusiastic. And Malati had come with her daughter Saraswati, who was about 3. And Saraswati would be clapping and chanting and giving garlands to Prabhupada. And, you know, Indian people just loved that. They couldn't get enough of it. So it was just an incredible success. The devotees actually brought Radharasa Bihari, who are worshipped now in Juhu, to the stage, and there was full deity worship, full arti, you know, full offering. And then Prabhupada would speak a very complete lecture in English, always in English, and very studious lecture. It was not, you could say, he made no attempt to entertain the audience. He expected that because we were human beings, we would apply our intelligence to this philosophy and understand its merit through our intelligence, at least during the lecture. Perhaps during the kirtan and so forth, there would be this emotional absorption and emotional appreciation. But the lecture was to understand with our intelligence that this is very logical, it's very rational, it's what we're missing in our lives, that if we apply it to our lives will improve. And there were so many Westerners who were feeling happy and fulfilled by this. So on the stage, the only Indian person was Srila Prabhupada. All the others were Westerners. And in the audience, with very few exceptions, it was just Indian people. So I was not yet involved or committed, and I didn't understand really the philosophy at that point. But I was riveted by the devotion and the appreciation of the audience of Srila Prabhupada, and how they were stunned that he had come with Western disciples. So, you know, it's on one hand you could say, to come to Krishna consciousness as a Westerner, we have many disadvantages because you're not brought up in this very rich culture, like the culture I was mentioning in Surat, of hospitality. You know, we don't know that standard of hospitality in the West. You know, if you come into a Western home, they'll say, oh, the water's over there if you want water. It's over there. And they're not properly trained, you could say. So there are many advantages. You're familiar, as Indian people, you're familiar with this culture and you imbibe it. But there are also disadvantages that in India we know Hinduism has become to some extent a hodgepodge or mishmash, so much demigod worship, so much impersonalism, so many misconceptions, which as Westerners we didn't have. In that sense we were blank slates, so that Prabhupada could explain to us that God is a person and we would accept that. Whereas in India, you know, he would meet with people and there would be these ongoing arguments. Even people who studied Bhagavad Gita and who considered themselves Vaishnavas. There was this one Dr. Patel who used to come on morning walks in Juhu, and he knew Bhagavad Gita thoroughly. He would come with a few friends, they could recite verses in Sanskrit very thoroughly, but he was actually an impersonalist. And they would have very heated arguments, Dr. Patel and Prabhupada. You can read them in these conversation books. And yeah, he didn't realize he was an impersonalist until Prabhupada pointed it out repeatedly. And sometimes the devotees would get disturbed that Dr. Patel was so, not only familiar with Prabhupada, but so argumentative. I remember Satsvrut Maharaj was on many morning walks, And when the argument got heated, I would watch. He was holding his danda. And he got so angry that his knuckles became white because he was holding his danda so strongly. They didn't, because we were very reverential towards Prabhupada, where Dr. Patel didn't have that mood. And so it became disturbing for all of us. And at some point, when Prabhupada saw how disturbed his followers were, he did something very unusual. He asked the devotees to bring the Krishna book. And so as we walked, the devotees would read from Krishna book up and down the beach. This is a long walk, a half hour down, a half hour back. It was exercise, very good exercise from Prabhupada. And all the way along, they'd be reading Krishna books, so there was no room for discussion. So Dr. Patel at some point stopped coming. He would walk the other way on the beach and offer his pranams because he was so much into this argumentative mood. But he also met with Prabhupada in Juhu in Prabhupada's room, and they had very warm discussions. And Prabhupada asked him, since he was well off as a doctor, there were many orphans who would come to the Juhu. It was not what it is today, 15 Juhu. It was just an open-air, very small open-air temple. And many children who didn't have much at all would come, ragamuffins, you could say. And in the evening, when Prabhupada would distribute prasadam from the plate, these children would come up and they would get a little halva, and then they'd go to the back of the line and come up again for another and then a third time. And Prabhupada would go like this, but he would give them more halva each time. So he asked this Dr. Patel that there's so many children that don't have proper clothing, can you please provide for them? Some proper clothing for them. Maybe you can give some funds and we can feed them. We'll give them prasadam. So in that way he engaged them in Krishna conscious altruistic activities. And so many years later, Dr. Patel wrote an article for Back to Godhead magazine. And he explained that he had not realized that he was an impersonalist, and that on these morning walks in the beach, Prabhupada, through this vehement discussions that they would have repeatedly, he was open all of a sudden to this idea that God is a person. He's not just a force or an energy, but he's actually a person with feelings, with love for his followers, with love for all living entities. And he said that these walks on the beach with Srila Prabhupada were the finest moments in my life. He had that realization. So he was profoundly moved. It wasn't a quick thing. It took a long, long time. So that's, as I'm trying to say, there's many advantages to having an Indian body, and there's also some disadvantages. And we would go in India to many, many homes, and there would be, as the most worshipable personality, Lord Shiva, or there would be the Om sign. Or some, Sai Baba was very frequently there on altars, and sometimes they'd have Jesus and Sai Baba and Shiva and Durga. It was like everyone was covered. So that was a disadvantage. There's a lack of clarity, and Prabhupada came with extreme clarity based on the scriptures, and couldn't argue with it because he could quote so many shlokas from Srimad Bhagavatam, from Bhagavad Gita, from authorized scriptures. So it was a matter of the people, Indian people, accepting. One of the things I was saying to Prema Tarangini Prabhu was that it's very nice to come here and see that this is Prabhupada's program. You haven't introduced Hinduism, you haven't introduced these anomalies that come sometimes, and misunderstandings that come along with the Hindu culture. So that's very nice to see. There are other temples that are said to be ISKCON, but they chant bhajans that perhaps are not acharyas' bhajans, and they have worship and ceremonies that are perhaps not what Prabhupada introduced, which is quite disturbing for those of us who are eager to keep Prabhupada's standards. So thank you very much for adhering so strictly to what Prabhupada has given us, because we feel very confident that this is the way that we will experience happiness and also go back to Godhead. So it's a mixed bag, and also it's a mixed bag being of a Westerner, because I was saying we're lacking all this culture. which is a great lacking. But at the same time, the positive side is that we were blank slates. Prabhupada says Krishna is God, and Krishna is God. We have no argument. We're not going to come with impersonalism or Lord Shiva or Durga. And so many things that he introduced, and we said, yes, we just accept so many aspects of bhakti and of the process of bhakti. So it's a wonderful thing to see the pros and cons of both. But overall, to be born in an Indian body is a higher birth. I'm quite convinced of that. The Westerners, it takes so much to bring them to Krishna consciousness, and then to keep them there is another challenge, big challenge. I think in the early days, it's hard to imagine what Prabhupada went through coming from the culture that he came from to the West in the 1960s, where it was a culture of freedom in sexual behavior, so much drug use. Can you imagine? He's never experienced drug use. There was so much respect between male and female, and when they came together, it was out of sacred duty in India. And he comes to the West, and there's what's called this free love. Can you imagine? I mean, it's hard to believe. But he was studying the West, and he didn't reject it, fortunately. Many of his godbrothers said they would not do what Prabhupada did because they're going amongst such low people, animalistic people, don't know how to eat, don't know how to associate with the opposite sex, no culture at all. So the fact that Prabhupada came there and was personally untouched by it and able to engage these really animalistic people in Krishna's service and to see that little spark of spiritual seeking there and to fan that so it became a flame. It's just a unique contribution in the history of the world, in the history of religion. It should never be underestimated or overlooked. And you'll see, when you see the film, the Hare Krishna film, not only did he suffer 2 heart attacks on the Jaladuta coming over, we did some research into that, and we found that there's a certain stimulus, you could say, for heart attacks, which is seasickness. Severe seasickness can stimulate heart attacks. I didn't know that before. But Prabhupada had no history of heart trouble before he went on the Jaladuta, but he did experience extreme seasickness. He couldn't eat for some time because of it. And then after that, he had these terrible heart attacks. He said that the pain it came one night and then the next night. And he said the pain was so severe that if it had come a 3rd night, he surely would have passed away. But fortunately it didn't. And then he had a dream. Lord Krishna came to him in his dream, and the different avatars of Krishna were rowing the boat safely to New York. Later on, the captain's wife, Captain Pandya's wife, said the crossing was actually very smooth, one of the smoothest crossings by Krishna's grace. And then in New York, first he went to Butler, Pennsylvania. He had a sponsor in Butler, Sally Agarwal, and her husband Gopal Agarwal. Do you know the story of how he got that sponsor? Are you familiar with that? So he went there, he studied American life. He was fascinated by vacuum cleaners and supermarkets and so on. And after 3 weeks, he went to New York. And he lived, first of all, with Dr. Mishra, and then from Dr. Mishra, he wanted to be able to preach freely, so he went and rented an office building, an office space. And from there, he would go out every day to sell his books, his Srimad Bhagavatam, to bookstores. And then in the evening, on 3 days a week, he would invite people to come to hear Srimad Bhagavatam. And in that way, he was struggling, severely struggling, pulling on. And winter came, and it was the worst winter in 40 years in New York City, and he had never before seen snow, what to speak of live through that winter. And then one day he was out selling his books, and he comes back to his office, and there had been a theft. Someone had broken in, stolen the only two valuable things he had, his typewriter and his tape recorder. And at that point, he said he became very depressed. And he was going to the shipping company. When is the next ship leaving for India? Sumati Morarji, who had sponsored his trip, she had given him a round-trip ticket. So he was free to go back any time. And so every day he would go, and the clerk at the shipping company said, Swamiji, you're coming every day to ask when the boat is going, but you never go. And he was saying, no, let me try for some more time. I will try a little more. And then around that time he met Michael Grant, who became Mukunda Maharaj. And from there he got 26 2nd Avenue, and from there devotees started to come. And Prabhupada was cooking every day for them. So in this film, our goal from the very beginning when we made this film was to have Prabhupada himself tell as much of the story in his own words as possible. So there's 1,800 hours, a little over 1,800 hours of audio of Prabhupada speaking, lectures and conversations, morning walks. And so we went through all of that, and we picked out those sentences where he expresses what happened to him, what he personally was going through. So it's very wonderful to hear it from his own lips, because then it's incontrovertible. You can't argue with it. It comes from him. And he never sat down. No one ever sat him down and said, please tell us what you went through. It would come up from time to time, his different experiences. So there was one time in Hyderabad that we had a farm a little outside the town of the city of Hyderabad. And the farm had problems from the beginning. So Prabhupada was visiting that farm at one point, and the devotees served prasadam to the guests, as we do at every festival, at every function. And Prabhupada asked, as he very, very often did, I would like to taste some of the prasadam that you serve. So they brought him a plate, and he was so upset because it was completely substandard. I don't know if it was the ingredients or the cook. The devotees had found that they needed to hire a Brahmin cook, so it wasn't a devotee, initiated devotee cooking. And it turned out this person was neither a Brahmin nor a cook. He needed a job. So he wasn't qualified, and perhaps the ingredients were also substandard. But whatever it was, Prabhupada said this is completely unfit to serve, and he was very upset. And then he started speaking. And at this point, he said, he went back to 26 2nd Avenue. And he said, at the beginning, I was cooking myself. Every day, there'd be 15 to 20 people coming, and I would cook and serve also. And these were young men. They could eat. They were hungry. And sometimes they would eat 15 chapatis at a sitting. And Prabhupada was cooking. These people. And then he said on the weekends there'd be 200. And he was also cooking. So we took out that little section and we put it in 26 2nd Avenue. So you're not aware that Prabhupada is extremely upset in Hyderabad. Hare Krishna, Jai Shri Krishna. Yeah, you're not aware of the circumstances, you're just aware that he's recalling. So it'd be like that, you know, at different times, like sometimes when he went back to New York City for the Rath Yatra, a tremendous Rath Yatra down 5th Avenue, he was driving around, the devotees were taking him around, and he pointed out different office buildings, like on 72nd Street. He said, oh, I was living there. So at different times, he would remember these things and speak about them. And so we picked out those as much as we could and put it in the film so that Prabhupada himself tells his story. So it's quite authentic in that way. One point that I was not aware of is that we know that Prabhupada was in Radha Damodar temple writing his Srimad Bhagavatam, first canto. So when the 3 volumes of the first canto were completed, he said, which somehow is not in the Lilamrita as far as I'm aware of, he said, after the 3 volumes were completed, so the first canto is done, my Guru Maharaj gave me indication that now it is time to go to America. It's not there, yeah. So this is 1965. His Guru Maharaj left in 1936. So this is how many years later? So there's still very much communication between him and his Guru Maharaj. His Guru Maharaj came to him in a dream and insisted that he take sannyas. And Prabhupada said, how horrible, how can I leave my family? And he came again in a dream and said, no, now it is time for you to take sannyas. So in that way, there was still communication from his pure heart. He was still able to hear his Guru Maharaj instructing him in this way. So, you have some questions or something you would like in particular to hear about? Or I'm just kind of rambling here. Please.
Could you share your experiences in the film that you made, and any particular instances when you felt Prabhupada's mercy during the process of this filmmaking?
Everyone heard the question? So this film, Hare Krishna, took us 4 years, and I would not say it was easy. Rather, I would say it was quite difficult, very challenging for us. And probably the biggest challenge was just the volume of material that we had. As I say, it's 1,800 hours of audio of Prabhupada. Now the majority of that, the vast majority, is philosophy. Because when he spoke in his room or on the Vyasa or on morning walks, he was teaching. He was teaching us the philosophy and how to understand it in different ways so we could apply it in our lives and learn to see Krishna in our lives, make it very present and relevant. So it was very infrequently that he would come up with these personal stories. So to find them was quite challenging to begin with. And then beyond that, there's 31 hours. If you've had the Following Srila Prabhupada series, there's 31 hours of film of Prabhupada to go through. We were making a 90-minute film to distill from 31 hours of footage of Srila Prabhupada. And then also we did interviews. We interviewed Prabhupada's devotees, his followers, and also scholars that knew Prabhupada. We interviewed Sali Agarwal, who hosted him in Butler in the early days. So we had about 80 hours of interviews. And beyond that, there's archival footage from the 60s and 70s, so you can get an idea of what Prabhupada was going into when he came. The civil rights movement was going on. Anti-war in Vietnam was very strong. The drug culture. Have you ever heard of Timothy Leary? I don't know. He was saying, tune in, drop out. Turn on, tune in, drop out. That was his mantra. He was very big into LSD, which is a psychedelic drug. And so you had a whole generation of youth who were experimenting with drugs, sometimes very heavy drugs. This is what Prabhupada was walking into. So to recreate this in the film, we used some of this archival footage from the 70s. Martin Luther King was active at that time. And then also we went to India and we did reenactments of Prabhupada's early life when he was a child growing up in India, when he met his Guru Maharaj in 1922. So we had just a mountain of material. And to find the golden thread of Prabhupada's life and his teachings, so that even a non-devotee walking in to see the film could understand it, and also to do it in an artistic way, so it was also entertaining, which is very important. It was just Herculean for us. But fortunately, by Krishna's grace and Prabhupada's grace, there was a couple who recently made a film called Awake about Yogananda Paramahamsa. He's the author of Autobiography of a Yogi, a very famous book. So they made a 90-minute film about Awake. And we were introduced to them. We went to the Boston celebration of the 50th anniversary of Prabhupada arriving in America. And at that time, a very active person called Amit said, oh, I know these people who made Awake, I'll introduce you. So we got to know this couple, and they became first of all, they saw the footage that we had. At that time, we had 2.5 hours, which was the best we could do. It was like way too long. And they saw the footage and they fell in love with Srila Prabhupada. They were so moved by his personality, his sacrifice, his determination, his faith. They were just amazed by it. And so they helped us, and they helped us tremendously. We would not have the film we have today without their help. So we were enormously grateful to Prabhupada that he won over their hearts, this couple that they had never heard of him before. And so they helped us find this beautiful thread of a story that's a very complete, I feel, a very complete experience of Prabhupada. You understand his journey, you understand his teachings, and you get a taste, a really sweet taste of his personality also. So help came from a very unexpected source, and we remain very indebted. Of course, we gave them credit in the film, and whenever we speak, like now, we give them credit also for their help. Also, we had young people. There were basically 5 of us in the core team, so 3 were young, under 30. And that was also very good, because the young people have a very different perspective on things than older people. Like we're used to, in my generation, we're used to films that go more slowly, but the young generation is like 1 second for a shot. 1 second, 1 second. It's like, it really moves. There's no time to waste. So at one point I had the assignment that I had to write down we have to get legal permission for each and every shot in the film. Right. So my job was to go through and write down each time the frame changed, each new shot, whether it's a still photograph or a motion picture. So in a minute, literally, there'd be 12 different shots. 12. And the film is 90 minutes long. So I had a big job. But this is what it needs to be for this audience. You know, if we make films like I'm used to, where things are very relaxed, people will fall asleep, they won't come, you know. The film art has changed significantly over the years. So these young people helped us, you know, wake us up to the new reality.
My question may be a little out of like the mood, but you as Prabhupada is out of like to understand. So I heard how Prabhupada ignited the spiritual consciousness in you and his love for towards man. But later on the movement went through so many tribulations. The movement went through so many tribulations. So how were you able to carry that all along?
You speak of after Prabhupada left? Yeah, after Prabhupada left, there was chaos. Oh, thank you. And he even writes about that in the 4th canto. When the spiritual master leaves, there's chaos. And there certainly was tremendous chaos. It was very, very difficult for us. I don't know if you know the history or want to know the history.
It's more like your sharing.
So it was very challenging. And personally, my husband and I, we really stuck to the basics. The basics being that we're not the body. Okay, so we're not the body. That makes complete sense. We're souls. And the souls have a relationship with God. And that relationship is one of joy. And we can experience that through this beautiful process. Chanting and hearing and studying Prabhupada's books. So all this chaos was going on, but if we stuck very firmly to those very simple foundational points, we felt that we could weather it somehow. And that sooner or later it would work itself out. And so that's pretty much what happened. To make a long story very short. But it was terrible to see the devastation that happened in Prabhupada's movement. It was very painful. And you can trace it back to missing those basic points. That people started to think that they were very important. And they lost the beauty of Krishna consciousness through that pride, really. So that really reinforced Prabhupada's message in many ways, you know. If we forget how small we are and start thinking that we're very important people, then it creates havoc in our lives and the lives of people around us, people who are depending on us. So in that way, it was strengthening. As teachings came alive.
One more question. In the same lines, because I was a Sunday school teacher. I'm a Sunday school teacher.
Uh-huh.
So my question is, how were you able to pass, you have two wonderful daughters, you mentioned how they nicely took Krishna consciousness. How were you able to pass that to the next gen? How were you be able to pass that great culture of Krishna consciousness down to the second generation? The challenge, at least I face, is a lot of the children are born in the movement. They're kind of used to it. They take it for granted. So
Sure.
I'm just trying to understand how that happens.
Yeah. Well, one thing that we felt from the very beginning was that since each of us is a soul and we have a minute amount of independence, that at some point our children would independently decide if they wanted to be devotees and how much they wanted to be devotees. And we kept that perspective always as we tried to bring them to Krishna consciousness, in the sense that we never forced them to do anything. We did it. We were always there chanting and attending the programs and so forth. But for us, it was their independent decision that they would make at some point in their lives, sooner or later. They would say, yes, I would like to be a devotee, or no, I'm more interested in other things, or some mixture of that. And so the fact that we never forced them, but we always followed ourselves, Prabhupada's teachings, I think was very impactful. And we also, the other thing we tried to do consistently was to ensure that their friends were devotees. Because the friends, a young child, their whole world is their mother and father. That's all they know. And maybe their siblings. And as they grow up, the parental influence is less and less, and the peer influence is more and more, especially in the West. Less perhaps in India, but especially in the West. It comes to a certain age in the West, and the children tend to do the opposite of what the parents want, and they do what their peers want. And so for us, it was very important that their peers were devotees, because the peers have such an influence as teenagers, this kind of herd mentality. You're not thinking for yourself. Like they went through a period where the young men were wearing chains. They'd have a chain attached to their pants. So one was a devotee, and I asked him, what is the chain about? He said, I don't know. All his friends are wearing chains, so he wore chains. So it's like that. It's really like lemmings, they just follow blindly. So it's so important that their friends are devotees, which is, of course, one of the dangers, you could say, or the detriments of sending the children to public school, because that won't be the case. Of course, sometimes you have to do that, but it's something definitely to be aware of. Does that reply? But this idea of making the children chant a certain... We never did that. Never did that. Even when they came to the temple, if they wanted to play outside, that was fine. They knew that we were here and we were worshiping. And if they wanted to do something else, that was...
Mataji, you mentioned the point about the cultural differences and the advantages and disadvantages. My personal observation is that, especially for people from the West who take to Krishna consciousness, when they take it up, they make a significantly rapid amount of progress, and they're kind of like, the risk-taking is, they kind of take very good, they go to the extent of taking high amount of risks and sacrificing their lives. It's not that I'm generalizing or something, but mostly I see that in the Western devotees, especially Prabhupada disciples. So I just wanted to kind of like understand, because the social aspect in the Eastern culture is so deep, especially the relationships and all, it's so deep, and the social culture is so deep that even when one wants to take the risk, there are a lot of stakeholders because of this. So just wanted to have your thoughts on that.
Yeah, no, that's very true. There's another aspect that Prabhupada, before he came to the West, he said that he would go to a well-to-do gentleman who had 4 sons and said, you have 4 sons, let me have 1 son, I will make him brahmachari, Vaishnava brahmachari. And he said, no, my son must get good education, get good job. This is not possible. It cannot be. When he comes to the West, And the people, the young people, Shamsundar and Mukunda and all of them, they were ready to give up everything, sleep on the floor, because they didn't have, as you say, that tight family bond. They'd already left their families. They hardly saw their parents or talked to their parents except if they needed money, right? That was standard fare. And so they were ready to devote themselves fully, 100% to Prabhupada's movement. Malati and Shamsundar, when they left San Francisco to go to London, to establish the temple in London, they had a 2 or 3 month old baby, Saraswati, 2 or 3 months, traveling, no money to speak of, And they had no place to stay properly in England. They were living in cardboard box in the England winter. I mean, the sacrifice was just tremendous because they were so appreciative of Prabhupada, so enthusiastic, full of youthful energy, and they realized the importance of it, and they were into adventure. And Prabhupada was there encouraging them, so they were ready to give up everything, which, as you say, you don't find in so much to generalize in the Indian-born people. They're more into, predictable life path, rather than throwing it all to the wind, as the Westerners did. So Prabhupada used that to establish his movement. I mean, we have to be grateful for that. They very renounced. They were doing it in a crazy way before, and Prabhupada made it sane. He did it in a sane way.
So how does one come out of that conditioning, Mataji? Because of that social conditioning?
I think best to use the conditioning for Prabhupada's service, whatever it is. I mean, they were also conditioned in a sense, everybody in that generation left their parents. They were hippies, just wandering the streets. So that was a kind of conditioning. So Prabhupada used that conditioning in Krishna's service. So if you're conditioning this family way, you make your home an ashram. There's a temple, you have programs, you invite people. So it's not easy to give up. It's another type of conditioning that was very conducive for spreading Krishna consciousness, that type. So it's not easy to give that up. And to do it artificially doesn't work. We've seen that repeatedly. But to make your home an ashram, and it's very doable, very welcome, needed.
Hare Krishna, Mataji, thank you so much. It's so enlivening to hear about Srila Prabhupada. I have 2 parts of a question. Any special moments when you felt like, okay, this is it, this is my life, and I have to dedicate to Srila Prabhupada? That's one aspect. The other part is any challenging times that you were going and you were able to feel some personal reciprocation from Srila Prabhupada?
So I think the time in that month that we spent in Vrindavan was my transformative month. On Sunday I was explaining that. And it wasn't just one moment, but it was kind of spread out in that month. That when I went there, we went on the train and I had gotten glaucoma, this tearing of the eyes. And I also had diarrhea, which is very common for Westerners in India. And it was very hot, so I was constantly perspiring. There was no air. And the mosquitoes were bad and the flies were bad. So it was a very difficult time. And Vrindavan it wasn't like it is now at all. It was a very simple village and with dirt roads. And the women in the morning would sweep the dirt roads with their stiff brooms, and there were these billows of dust would fly up everywhere. So it was, in one, a certain material sense, it was not attractive. It was very difficult for me. But then when I got into the spirit of it, I had a tremendous, 180-degree change of appreciation for just the depth of the faith of the people, and realizing how important that is to my life and how lacking it was in my life. So that was a very unique experience, I would say. And as far as challenges, there are many, many challenges, the biggest ones being my own consciousness that I had. And Prabhupada also, he made very high expectations of us. He expected us to become Krishna conscious, basically, which is not an easy thing to do, actually, to be Krishna conscious. And, whenever he spoke, he had that expectation, which affects every aspect of your life. There's nothing that is not touched by that aspect of Krishna consciousness. And so, to fail in that, to experience some envy, some greed, some desire to cheat, all those things, is a great disappointment internally. So there'd be constant struggle, non-stop struggle in that sense. So you have the high of Vrindavan where, you have some kind of taste or glimpse of this incredible spiritual opportunity with Radha and Krishna and their associates. And meanwhile, you're in the very real material world with all these terrible feelings. And so that's quite a dichotomy to deal with. But expectations are incredible. There was a study done. I read about my younger daughter studying to be a teacher. So they took a group of students, a large group of young students who are average academically and in terms of their behavior. And they divided them in half. They gave half to one teacher. And they told this teacher, "We're very sorry. These students are going to be constant trouble for you. Their behavior is terrible. They're substandard achievers. You're just going to have to deal with it somehow or other." And they took the other half, they gave it to another teacher. These teachers are comparable, the two teachers, and they said, "You're really fortunate. These children are excellently behaved. They're very high achievers. They're very motivated." And lo and behold, those two groups of students responded according to the expectations of the teachers. It was just amazing. So expectations are very powerful. If you expect, and that's one of Prabhupada's gifts to us, he expects us to become Krishna conscious. And he doesn't expect anything less from each and every one of us. So he's raising the bar as high as it can be raised, and he expects us to come to it. And if you expect anything less, we would come to a lesser standard, as you see by this example of the students. So the fact that his expectations are so high is one of the blessings that he's given us. But there's also, relation, like in relation to women, there's some, unfortunately, pervasive misunderstanding, and so people expect, oh, a woman is doing this or that, it won't be as good as if a man did it. So that expectation itself reduces the possibility that the woman will excel. But if you have the expectation that it'll be wonderful, there's more likelihood that it will be wonderful. So it's very powerful, this subtle quality of expectation.
I'm not sure if it's a question, but I would like to hear if you so decide. Something that strengthens me, or something that I feel really enlivened, is when I see Prabhupada disciples interacting with each other, and also in the biographies of many biographies. I'm waiting to read your book. So I was just wondering if you would like to share something about staying in Sharanagati. You spent some good amount of time, and I was just wondering, how were you able to actually maintain devotee relationships? Sometimes it's kind of hard in the sense that when I face like my own impurities, and it just becomes like there is a disconnect in devotee relationships that I feel, but I don't see. I see the exact opposite whenever I see disciples of Prabhupada interacting, and it's so sweet, and it's very, very deep in one sense. So I was just wondering if you'd like to share something about that.
Sharanagati is quite small. There's only about 50 families there, a small school. So relationships can be challenging. Fortunately, I lived right next door. Next door means it was about a 5-minute walk in Sharanagati. to Jamuna Devi and Dinatarani, and they would have regular programs in their home for their deities. Like every week, we would read from Chaitanya Charitamrita for an hour and a half. And not just read, but there'd be discussions, questions and answers. So it was in a time to exchange our thoughts, what we were going through, as well as reading. And that was very helpful for devotional relationships, you could say, because we got to know each other on a deeper level, and it was at the same time based on the scripture, because that's why we were there together. And then they would have wonderful programs around their deities, you know, for the standard programs that we do. But there would be bhajans, and they would have special activities. And so it was a time to come together with a very common goal, a common purpose, which helped also fortify our relationships. But it's not that it was without bumps. There were times when we actually had to have a mediator come in because there was a disagreement between a couple of people. So that was also very helpful. A qualified, he was a devotee, but he was trained as a mediator. And he was able to sit down and have these two personalities actually hear from each other. You know, there's something called reflective listening. Have you heard of that? Where someone speaks and you just express what you've heard or what you've understood of what they've said, and then it reverses. And so when you do that, you're able to see from the other person's point of view, maybe for the first time. And generally, there's always validity in their point of view that perhaps we've overlooked because we're so absorbed in our point of view, and vice versa. And so with that, there's some platform or some possibility of compromise. So we found that was also very important, because without that trained mediator, there were just, you know, conflict that was not being resolved or not healthy. So there's many, you know, things that we have to go through, but if the spirit is there that we want to make it work, that's the big thing, we want to make it work, then we find ways to do that. So it's about 8:30. Did we want to stop here for Prashadam? Yeah.
Hare Krishna. When you're taking photographs of Prabhupada, sometimes you may have to tell him to pose like how you want. So was it any point that you had some, because he's the guru, and was it any challenge for you, or was it easy for you? Another question is, did you get any appreciation from Prabhupada? Was it like he liked any, and he gave you some appreciation? Mm-hmm. And third aspect is, as a mother, was it any challenge for you to take Prabhupada pictures, being on there on time and all those things?
Mm. Okay, so the first question was
when you had to tell him how you wanted to get the picture.
Yeah. Have you all been to the Chicago temple? You've all been there? Yeah. So on the wall there's a very large picture of Prabhupada sitting, and he's just turned a little bit. Yeah. So the story behind that is that that was on the rooftop in Juhu. You know, they have the flat roofs, and Prabhupada would go up there every afternoon for darshan. And so I went up a little bit early, I guess, or people were late, I don't know, but it was just me and Prabhupada. So I sat down just below his dais, and I was sitting there with my camera, and he looked at me and he said, "Where should I look?" You see, you all got it right away. I didn't get it. I didn't understand what he was talking about. Because I was into photojournalism. So part of the training is that you never interfere with your subject. You just record your subject. So that was my training, and that's always how I approached Prabhupada. I never asked him to do anything as far as making a good photograph. So, yeah, it took me a few seconds. What is he talking about? Where should I look? And then I realized he's saying, where should I look to take a picture? And then I had to think of an answer. That was problem number 2. So my brain was just racing, you know. And so finally I said, wherever you like, Srila Prabhupada. So he turned just slightly. That would be to his right, I think. And that's the picture that's in the Chicago temple on the wall. It's a pretty large picture. Yeah. So yeah, no. The only occasion where I did ask him was when people wanted a formal portrait, and then he would borrow a dunda, which was usually way too big for him. The dunda is supposed to be 6 inches taller than the person, but his students were so tall, his dunda would be. And then he would stand in a grassy area or a tree-lined area, and I would take a picture. But usually I never asked him at all. And then yes, the young men often gave me problems, a lot of problems with photographing him. They were not at all appreciative. There was one devotee named Rameshwar. At that time he was a Swami, and he was in charge of the Bhaktivedanta Book Trust. And I was traveling and taking pictures for the Bhaktivedanta Book Trust to be published in the books, Prabhupada's formal picture in the books. And so he instructed me that we only want pictures of Prabhupada with his eyes open. We don't want pictures of Prabhupada with his eyes closed. So at that time, Prabhupada was in LA. The temple was packed because people came from all over California, and even they came as far as Denver to the temple, so it was just packed with people. And I was sitting at the bottom of the Vyasa, and Prabhupada was singing Jaya Radha Madhava, because he didn't like photographs taken during the lecture, because he wanted everyone to listen to him. And so the opportunity was Jaya Radha Madhava for his picture and he had his eyes closed for minutes. It was a long Jaya Radha Madhava. And so I was just sitting there waiting. Normally I would have taken photographs because I'd just gotten this instruction and I didn't want to argue, with my boss. So I was just sitting there waiting for him to open his eyes, with my camera. I had flashes all ready to go. And I felt this bump in my backside. What is that? And I turned around, and a sannyasi, I was sitting amongst the sannyasis because that's where they sit, and a sannyasi had hit me with his dunda because he saw I was just sitting there doing nothing. And he said, time to move on, and get out of here. And I looked at Prabhupada, and he had opened his eyes, and he saw that. And then he looked at the sannyasi with such a stern look. Oh my goodness. It was nothing. It was just, I was very glad that I was not the recipient of that look. And then I was able to take some pictures, and I scurried away after that. So yeah, there were many challenges in that way. And they had a third question? Sorry.
When you got appreciation from Prabhupada about the photography.
Oh, yeah. There was a time in Calcutta where there was one sannyasi Calcutta was extremely difficult. The devotees were getting sick. Again, the prasadam was substandard. It was another Brahmin cook, who again was neither a Brahmin nor a cook. And there wasn't a lot of money, so the ingredients were inferior, the cooking was inferior, devotees were getting sick, they weren't getting along with each other, and they would argue. It was unbelievable. Like, the pujari would say that this group of bananas were offered, and someone else would say, no, they're not offered, and they would argue whether the bananas were offered or not offered. So it was and the temple was never convincingly clean. This was the time of the war between India and Bangladesh, 1971. So Calcutta had 1 million refugees. We went from the train station to the temple. The whole streets were lined with families. They'd take potato sacks and open them up and tie them together to make a tent, and that was their home. They had come from Bangladesh to avoid the fighting. So, everything. It was just unbelievable. And so the whole city was under strain, and this temple also experienced that strain. And the devotees, they're not used to India, they're not used to the food, they're not used to the climate, they're not used to living with each other. So it was a terrible situation from many points of view. And Prabhupada was in his room once, and this devotee came in and started telling him all the troubles in the temple, one after the other, after the other, after the other. And Prabhupada was just sitting listening. Most of the time he had his eyes closed. And I took a series of 4 or 5 pictures that later we developed and printed. They were in black and white, and we showed them to Prabhupada. And he has a very calm expression. His eyes are closed, and you can't tell so much. if he's listening or if he's, in his own absorption. So he looked at these 4 or 5 pictures and he said, oh yes, she has captured the mood. So he was very encouraging of our service. There was one time we were in Paris and there was an ecstatic kirtan going on, and my husband had this big, heavy 16mm movie camera to film. That was the time of the installation of the deities in Paris. So he put the movie camera down to join the kirtan, and he was dancing. And Prabhupada called him over like this. And he went up to Prabhupada, and he had to put his ear right next to Prabhupada's mouth to hear because the kirtan was so loud. And Prabhupada said, never put down your camera. So he liked the service.
Thank you. Thank you so much for the wonderful pictures.
Oh, thank you. It was our service, what we were doing, what we were trained to do, so we just continued doing it. It's Prabhupada's kindness to us, to engage us. Thank you all very much. All glories to Srila Prabhupada. Hare Krishna.